Welcome, Mr. Blanks. It's really a pleasure to have you here on stage. And I think that your professional and your personal insights on the fashion world can be really a nice wrap-up for this conference day. But I wanted to start with the beginning. If you think back to your childhood, what are your first recollections of fashion?
And that was so long ago. I'm sure it's longer than anybody else here has been alive. But my very first fashion memory is, it's incredibly vivid, is Jean Shrimpton at the races in Melbourne, the Melbourne Cup.
Okay.
I think it was probably 1963. And she wore what was considered a miniskirt in those days. I think she was wearing a Mary Quant dress. It came to her knee. She didn't wear a hat, she didn't wear stockings, and Australasia melted down. It was a complete and utter scandal. And that was my first fashion memory, because I suppose you could say that was my introduction to the power of clothes, because she looked amazing. She looked like she just was ready to go to church or something.
Yeah.
But it just offended everybody, including my mother. So I remember how offended my mother was.
Okay. And
She had bare legs, for God's sake.
and how did you end up working in fashion later?
It was an accident. It's,
No.
I know it would be so wonderful if I could say something instructive about my experience, but I was living in Toronto in Canada, and I was tired of freelance writing because I
But
wanted...
you was a rock journalist.
I was writing about music, I was writing about art, I was writing about everything actually, including fashion. But it was a fashion magazine that offered me a full-time job. And I became the editor of that magazine after a while, and the CBC was launching a 24-hour news network like CNN.
Yeah.
And I proposed a show about fashion to them, a magazine show, which was Fashion File. And it just was perfect timing. You know, there's a happy accident. I've never been an ambitious person, but I've always worked hard and I've always been lucky. And so it just happened that we started it about 6 months before the supermodel phenomenon launched.
Yes, yes.
And that changed everything for everybody in fashion, and definitely steered me on that path where I've been more or less for the last quarter of a century.
Yeah, already. Yeah, I think you started covering fashion in 1985.
Yes. Well, the
And-
first fashion show I ever went to was an Yves Saint Laurent couture show. Actually, it was in 1987.
Okay.
That was the very first fashion show I ever went to in Paris. So.
But then the conditions were completely different.
Completely.
No internet, no smartphones.
No mobiles. If you arranged to meet somebody, you had to be there.
And how did that influence your work as a during Fashion Week, for example?
Well, it's funny. Somebody was just asking me how much things have changed, and I think fundamentally things haven't. Everything's much faster, but the fundamentals are the same. But you know, it's extraordinary that nowadays a fashion show is maybe 8 to 10 minutes long, and you would sit for an hour watching fashion shows then. Yves Saint Laurent would have 180 outfits. Yeah. And I mean, now there might be 30. So that's one thing that's changed. I think obviously people's attention spans have shriveled, but I thought the whole thing was just so amazing that I would have sat there for the rest of the day. I was just so enraptured by it. It was extraordinary.
But now you have a lot of people attending the shows and also buyers from new and emerging markets. You have the celebrities, the bloggers. And is there a moment when you were thinking, there is no more room for proper fashion journalism?
No, never. There wasn't room for proper fashion journalism then.
Okay.
That's what people tend to forget, is that the whole notion of fashion journalism has always been a little bit of a mirage. There has never been a criterion, or not a criterion, a canon is a better word, of fashion journalism like there has been for movie criticism or music criticism or theater criticism or ballet or opera or whatever. There never has existed this kind of pantheon of people who made their reputation being fashion critics. It just isn't. It was never there. I think in a sense, the whole notion of the fashion critic being a personality is an idea that's been brought on by the digital age. I think before that, it didn't really exist as a you know, movie critics were revered. Movie critics had their criticism collected into books and published, and music critics were superheroes. The people who wrote for Rolling Stone when it started were superheroes. That just didn't exist for fashion. So actually, what we're living through now is kind of, it's almost the dawn of writing about fashion in a very immediate vernacular way. Not really the dawn, it's been going on for a few years now, but I would say that compared to where criticism is with every other medium, we're kind of playing catch up. So I actually read everything and look at everything and just think great. Although I would say that the difference with fashion commentary, especially because we are talking about blogs, I assume, is that for me the most interesting fashion blogs are the photo blogs, because that seems to me the one that honors the nature of the medium better than somebody sitting down and writing 14,000 words on something they've just seen. Although I like to read that as well. I like looking at pictures. I think Scott Schumann, Tommy Ton, and Phil O have made a huge difference to the way people see fashion, much more than any writer has.
So it doesn't bother you, this evolution that a lot of bloggers, and then they taking the front row, sometimes much to the dismay of the...
Nothing bothers me.
Okay.
I don't feel... You mean, do I feel threatened?
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's funny. I did think it was very funny when Dolce & Gabbana put a whole lot of bloggers in the front row and all the journalists were, you know, second or third row. That's an outrage. I used to go to fashion shows and stand because I'd come from Canada, and Canada was, where's that? You know, and Poland would be in the back row in their seats, and Canada would be standing behind Poland.
And Belgium, somewhere in between.
Oh, I think Belgium was probably much further, much closer to the front. You had the 6, remember?
Yeah. Of course.
So I was happy to stand. I was happy to be there. I remember a writer who I love called Hal Rubinstein, who was a wonderful restaurant critic, said that who cares where he sat at Le Cirque, even if he was sitting by the bathroom door, he was still eating the same food as Jackie O. And I always felt I was seeing the same thing as whoever was in the front row, and often you saw better standing, because in those days the photographers were all around the catwalk. They weren't all piled at the back. So they were lined up and down. So the people in the front row were sitting behind photographers. So I was standing way at the back, and I had a perfect view all the way down. So I was happy. I was happy to be there. Yeah.
But you are known for your writing, and that, well, some people say, yeah, he writes in a way very, with all the cultural references, and sometimes it's difficult. And one journalist told me, I suspect him of using in every review one word nobody knows. Is this true?
No. I mentioned David Bowie once in every review. I make a point of that. But no, I love words. I love writing. I think, to me, writing is like making candy floss. You know, you're spinning and spinning. And I was just saying to someone that my intention is always to convey an impression of what it's like to be at the fashion shows I'm writing about. So context is very important to me, and I would like to create atmosphere. And if a big word adds to the atmosphere because it adds a little bit of mystery or something, then I'm perfectly happy with that. And also, you know, you can look a word up. I look a word up if I don't know what it means.
Google.
And, yeah, I did Google or dictionary. God forbid. I just, maybe I'm, no, I would give people credit that if there's something they don't know, they will try and find out what it is.
And is there a difference for you writing for like style.com or for a magazine?
The difference is that we have to turn our copy around for style.com immediately. And so the first thought is the best thought, or the only thought, and you can't go back and revise unless you make a hideous factual error, and then you're allowed to revise. But the immediacy, obviously, actually, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but the immediacy of writing for style.com has made all of my writing more immediate. You know, if I see a deadline, I just think, oh, I've got a month.
Okay.
And so then I used to write essays at university about this. I'd do them 2 or 3 days after they were due. And I think no. Answer to your question, no.
Yeah.
Everything I do is absolutely spur of the moment and super, super, super fast. So
Yeah.
probably that's not a good thing. But
So you have to work really hard during fashion weeks.
really, we don't sleep. I don't think. I work with Nicole Phelps. We were in my room until 4 or 5 in the morning every night for a month or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I love that. I just love that pressure. It's incredible.
You follow like women's wear,
Men's
menswear,
wear.
so
Haute couture.
that's a lot of time in fashion weeks for you.
Yes, I've seen thousands and thousands of fashion shows. It's a strange way for a man of a certain age to spend his life, but it just gets more, and it's funny, people say, don't you get sick of it? Obviously, if I got sick of it, I would stop. But I don't, because it's an endlessly renewing proposition. The cast of characters changes every so often, and you get a whole new set of stories. It's interesting hearing about the storytelling, because it's the first thing I always say, how do you judge a show? I judge it by how convincing the story that it's telling me is. And you always get new storytellers, and it's always moving. I wouldn't say I don't know if it's always changing necessarily, but it's always moving. Yeah. And movement, you feel you get caught up in that, and you get swept along. And I'm very, very enthusiastic about what I do.
Yeah, but all these fashion weeks, I know you have like an abundance of fashion weeks everywhere in the world.
Transylvania has a fashion week.
Did you attend?
I didn't go. They could afford to send me to Transylvania for 1.5 days to Fashion Week in Transylvania. So I thought, what do I do with the other half day? And I thought, maybe I'll skip that one.
Yeah, but do you believe that maybe we can call them the big four, like New York, London, Paris, Milan, that they will stay the most important cities, or this will change?
I do think that. A fashion week I personally love is Tokyo, because the last time I was at Tokyo Fashion Week, I think it was a year ago, I had honestly not heard of one single designer whose show I went to, and they were all absolutely wonderful. I mean, most of them were wonderful. They were so beautifully thought through, staged, the hair and makeup, the music. They were so perfect, and they lived in this bubble that the rest of the world doesn't know about. The designers aren't particularly interested in selling anywhere else. And there was something, there was something incredible about that. The big four will stay the big four because they're outward looking. Everything they do is designed to promote to the world. I don't see that happening anywhere else. I see certain cities like Sydney or Rio making a good effort because they are very, very based on what their market does best. Say, both of them do. You wouldn't imagine that sitting through a week of bathing suit shows could be interesting, but actually it takes on a strange hypnotic fascination after a little while. And
I suppose it was more than that.
Well, no, not for me. But I realized that it was strong because it's directly addressing that context. That Rio, it's directly addressing the life in Rio, the life in Sydney. So those cities which have one very, very strong story to tell, and tell it well, will always be there. But in terms of the variety and the polish, the consistency, the coherence, the machine that makes it all happen, the big four will stay the big four.
Yeah, and we already talked about fashion shows because everything is changing, but the one thing that doesn't change is maybe the fashion show in itself. And if I'm cynical, I could say like it's 10 minutes of models showing clothes, but it's much more than that. And you like it. What's so intriguing about it?
You know why does a designer do a show? A designer does a, you get those designers who don't even put the clothes that they're selling on the catwalk.
Yes.
A designer does a show because the designer wants the music, the hair, the makeup, the set, the smell of the place, the location. All of these things are facets of why they do what they do. And when you come away from a show that has moved you or impressed you or provoked you, you just realize the fashion show will never die. I've seen, there have been some very artful presentations with people moving into sort of half a presentation, half a show, young designers who can't afford the full thing. And then other designers who see that it's an intelligent option. There have been some very good ones of those, but you know, when you come away from the, say, Miuccia Prada's show, not this season was pretty phenomenal, but last season, it was, you walk out of that show and you're not thinking about clothes on a catwalk, you're thinking about David Lynch, or you're thinking about Alfred Hitchcock, or you're thinking about something which isn't, you know, which is so evocative and very moving, and you're reminded of where fashion sits in this sort of creative continuum, that what fashion represents, when it's allowed to represent, what it can represent.
And so with all the live streaming, you think there is no alternative to being present in the room?
Nothing replaces physical presence. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I think about, you know, Lee Edelcourt?
Yes.
And she said that she was cursing Style.com one day because she said that it's reduced everything to this two-dimensional thing, that everybody looks at 40 slides of an outfit walking towards them. And the interesting thing is designers started to do so much with the back of clothing because of the red carpet phenomenon, that their clients were being seen in 360 degrees, so stuff started going on at the back. And when you're looking at slides of a show, you're looking at the front. And she was right, because I could swear that's what Rei Kawakubo was commenting on, was with a two-dimensional show. But to actually be sitting there and to feel the rhythm of a show, it's like it'd be like looking at a video of, you know, David Bowie's Diamond Dogs tour, you know, like a video on a cell phone or something. Just you're missing there's just so much more going on with a fashion show. You can't replace that the visceral impact of a show. Admittedly, they're only for they're for what, 1,000 people, and the only way the rest of the world sees them is in slides or in video snippets or on a designer online in a designer's website. But still, to be there. It sounds ridiculous, it sounds so elitist, but to be there has been the greatest privilege of my job, to be at these things. I don't quite know how being there translates into something that's valuable for everybody else who isn't there, but
how do we try to translate it?
That's the challenge. It'd be great to do it in pictures, but pictures don't do justice. So you have to do it in words. Now, you know, again, Isabel, a journalist from LA I was just talking to, was asking me about why David Bowie was so important to me when I was young. And it was before there was internet and social media, so everything you had about David Bowie was snippets from magazines and newspapers, and you never saw videos, and there were no, and to go to that exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, you realize that nowadays Rihanna goes to the bathroom and there's 40 camera phone things of it within 30 seconds on the internet. David Bowie did these huge, spectacular shows, and they were never filmed. They were never filmed completely. And so everything about him existed in your imagination. Everything that he meant to you, you made. I was saying that he gave us the ingredients and we made the cake. And I think that's, in a funny way, it's almost old-fashioned that when you're writing about fashion, you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to communicate something that's entirely ephemeral in words. And, I mean, that's my challenge. That's a challenge of everybody who writes about fashion. Some people do it better than others, but
You received an award from
Oh,
that.
yeah. You know what? Somebody said, congratulations on your Lifetime Achievement Award. And I was thinking, my God, that means it's over. I didn't want it to be over. So I have to prove it isn't over. I don't know how I'm going to do that.
But you love fashion and you're a
Yes.
fashion critic. Can you combine these two? Can one be like a fan
Yeah.
and critical at the same time?
Absolutely. Of course you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. You say bad things to your friends when they piss you off. I think it's important. It's important to maintain a degree of, the only reason I can't turn like this is because this thing is digging into my head. If it looks like I'm fixing it, I'm totally aware of everything over there. No, it's important. It's that the notion of objectivity. I mean, it's a bitter irony this season that was people have been asking me this. You know, it's very weird to be talking about what I do because, like I said, before, until quite recently, people like me, nobody was remotely interested in who you were or what you did. And so this is a relatively new phenomenon. But one of the first questions I get asked, or you know, I do always get asked, is what happens when you give a designer you like a bad review? Or do you give designers you like bad reviews?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I mean, I think I do. I hope they come across as bad sometimes because I don't love everything, but a lot. But this season, ironically, a whole lot of people who I really like, I gave bad reviews to. And it just seemed like I was knee-jerk responding to people saying, oh, you know, you wouldn't say anything bad about a friend. You know, I'm not a friend. There are people I like. I don't go to their summer house. I don't go on their boat. I'm not one of those.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who do that. But it was just a funny thing that
Like Jean-Paul Gaultier wrote you, but that was another.
that was just so, I don't know. I think I don't know what to say about that. I didn't think I was horrible, and then he wrote me a letter, and I was going to respond to it. You know, he wrote me a letter, so I was going to write back and say, well, you know, this is what I do, and I'm not there to, you know, blow your trumpet, but I've criticized you in the past, and then I've loved what you've done, and that's just the way it works out. You know, nobody's perfect all the time. And then, so that was fine. I was busy formulating my response, and the problem was he tweeted what he wrote to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, well...
And you are not on Twitter.
No. I thought, who looks weird there? Because...
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
like in the open.
he's the one that history remembers, not me. So why is his skin so thin? That's... Anyway, that was a strange one. There have been worse. That was just the one that was most public.
Yeah, but some... But getting back to fashion shows, can you describe a fashion show that you love the most or that you will remember forever?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot. And seeing we're in Antwerp, I was thinking about the local designers who have done shows that I really love.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing it for a long time, it's interesting. They used to be, it's funny, they used to be bigger. People talk about the change, and you would imagine that with the media coverage that there would have been a degree of, you know, scaling up as time goes on. But actually, Franco Moschino's shows, I was just reminded of those when I saw his 30th anniversary, the 30th anniversary party for the label in Milan this season. They were playing old videos of his shows, and they were amazing. They were like political rallies with clothes. They were so extraordinary. Gautier's old shows, Galliano's old shows, McQueen's shows, the things that they did on the catwalks that were physically impossible, but they did them.
It was more like a statement? Or?
Yeah. I mean, McQueen had this sort of very pragmatic attitude. He said that at the end of a fashion season, when everybody's seen 1,000 shows, he wants to give people something that would entertain them.
Yeah.
He didn't really want to do that. He wasn't... The milk of human kindness wasn't running through his veins quite like that. But, you know, I think it was just, when you see fashion used like that, when you see designers who are artists using fashion the way a painter paints or a sculptor sculpts or Alfred Hitchcock makes movies, it becomes an entirely different level of, you know, he would do the show before he did the collection.
Yeah.
And I think Miuccia Prada is similar in that she works on the concept and the clothing at the same time. I think Dries does this as well. I think the clothes and the concept feed each other. His shows, some of his shows, the show with the 800,000 fairy light curtains at Rosenfeld, and the music was Godspeed You Black Emperor, and it was one of the most, it was like being in a cathedral and gods were coming down or something. It was just so completely extraordinary. Raf Simons did a show in this industrial park in Paris, and his models were coming up and down these incredibly long sort of sci-fi escalators with these white wind coats on. They looked like angels. I mean, if I'd been on drugs, which I really was, I was on drugs for quite a lot of really good fashion shows, but I always seem to miss the really good ones on drugs. It looked like a vision from heaven. And then the Miuccia Prada show last season, the David Lynch one. The detail in the show, the movies, the way the movies were integrated with the props and things was, I mean, I went to I was doing a documentary about Dolce & Gabbana, and they had a fashion show at Steven Spielberg's house in Los Angeles, and they turned his tennis court into this sort of Sicilian palace. And he came down and he was completely gobsmacked. He was just overwhelmed by what fashion could do in the moment. You know, not doing blue screen or whatever, but green screen, blue screen?
Blue screen.
A screen. Just the thing, that the atmosphere that they could recreate, actual living atmosphere. I think it would be, and then going right back to Claude Montana's shows, and the sort of the shows that moved like molasses, just so slow and so glacial and serene, and just really enormous moving pieces of theater that will stay with me. Just things that Karl Lagerfeld goes on and on and on doing at every Chanel show. He just, you know, freights in a 100-ton iceberg from somewhere and sticks it in the middle of the Grand Palais, or he builds a forest with mature trees. And this is for 10 minutes. It's almost like Nero or something, you know. It's so...
The flowers at Raf Simons?
Oh, yes, yeah,
Flowers
absolutely. Like millions and millions of flowers that live for that little moment, die for that little moment. It seems, I've always said I'd love to live forever, because I'd really love to read what people write about this moment. For all sorts of reasons, like politically and socially and everything as well. But I wonder what sense they'll make of fashion when they write about it.
And now, if you go back to reality, on the fashion media landscape, because it's difficult to print magazines, and a lot of people need the advertising money of big labels, and there is a big pressure. Do you feel that pressure too, like in magazines, websites?
To be nice about advertisers.
Yes. Yes, or not writing bad reviews, or putting like marketing interviews.
What I'd give the cop-out response and say that's not my job. So I feel, the whole notion of banning people is kind of a strange one, but and pulling advertising. Yeah, it happens. I think there's a way. I don't know, I think there's a way to be critical without inflaming sensibilities, or being critical in a way that the people you're criticizing respect you. But I do understand that there are designers who will pull their advertising because they don't like where their ad runs in a magazine. So God, you know, forget you saying something bad about their show. I don't find many fashion magazines per se are very critical. I think they edit by omission. If they don't like something, they don't put it in the magazine. They won't say they don't like it.
That's a safe option.
And then the advertiser comes in and says, you haven't covered my collections for 3 seasons, I'm pulling my advertising.
Yeah. So that's also pressure and an influence on the content of the magazine.
I don't know, I think it happens everywhere else. I think it happens, in Iron Man 3, the villains weren't Chinese anymore because that would piss off the Chinese market. I think it's this law of the marketplace that people bow. Money talks, people walk. So.
And how do you deal with PR people? Because PR people now have also really a big role, not a great role, but a big role in fashion journalism. How do you deal with them? Because they can ask for the number of pages, for...
How do I deal with them? Do you understand PR?
Sometimes.
I don't really understand PR. Well, again, that's their job, and that's not my job to respond to their demands. If I want to do something, I will generally try and set it up on my own. And I have done that a lot, and that makes me laugh when I see what I did on my own show up on their presentation to their client as something that they put together. I guess there's a use for it. It's a bit of a wishy-washy answer. I can't really, I don't know. Again, there are PR people who I like working with, and there are PR people who...
Yeah, of course.
Who bug me.
And I think there are a lot of PR people here in the room, so I don't want
to
offend them.
My very dear friends.
No, but it's about one kind of PR. But maybe to end on a positive note, you know Belgian fashion very well, and can you tell me, when did you discover Belgian fashion? Was it like with the Six of Antwerp?
No, I think they were a bit before me. When were they? I have a feeling I would 85-ish, were they?
Yes.
I think that might have been just when I was starting. I think probably I came across them because of Walter, who see when you're somewhere and you see Walter there, oh, that's Walter. You're fascinated by him even when you don't know he's one of the Antwerp Six. And then what amazes me about Antwerp, given it punches so far above its weight in fashion. The people, even now, the people who are coming out of Antwerp, who are showing in Paris and very convincingly creating reputations for themselves. I don't know what this city absolutely fascinates me, I have to say, because I know it used to be one of the most powerful cities in the world. And there's a sort of, there just is a cultural reservoir here that doesn't exist in many other places. So it's obviously an inspiration for a very particular creative sensibility. And so I guess I came to the Antwerp Six later on, getting to know them individually and then loving their stories about getting in a bus and going to London to see David Bowie concerts, because I lasted 10 minutes without saying his name. So that kind of thing just fascinated me because they felt like kindred spirits.
But Dries and Raf and Walter, they're all Bowie fans too.
Yes,
so,
yes, I know all of them, everybody. Yeah. And it is that incredible concentration of just unique fashion voices. All of them are different. Each one of them is very, very different from the other. It's, the only similarity, the only analogy is London, where you've got a whole lot of young designers who are all radically different from each other. And you know what it is? It's the college, it's St. Martin's, it's the academy, it's the educational system that really fosters individuality.
You were in the jury before here.
And I was one of the judges.
Yeah. And what impressed you the most?
The books that they made for their collections that they get marked on. And that really pushes you into another medium to express yourself. And I think if you're making these books to visualize what's in your head for your clothing, you're basically writing poems about the clothes you're going to make. And I think it gives you a very different relationship with your clothes, with the clothes. I think it creates this, again, this notion that what you make in the end is a product of a whole lot of other things inside you. And I thought it was a very smart idea to make the students realize what was inside them before they took to the collection.
Yeah, yeah.
And those books need to be published or something. They need to be kept for posterity because they're so beautiful.
And you said about the Antwerp designers, they are all so individual. But if you have to have a label on them,
sorry about that. Eek, never rains. It's got cobwebs on it.
You can take it.
No. I'm not going to take a phone call. Makes me sound digital.
So, but I know it's difficult to put a label on them, but is there something that, if you have to describe, well, Belgian fashion, what's the worst you think about?
I suppose romance.
Sorry?
Romance. Antwerp was a merchant town, and the world met here, and all the big merchant cities. And you think of places like Venice. Venice and Antwerp had a very close connection. Mm-hmm. And I think the places that, the parts of the world that crossed paths in Antwerp were all very, very sophisticated. They were all very, very, they were fantastic places. They were like the places from almost like fairy tales. And there's that sense in Antwerp, you know, the diamonds and gold and silk and stuff from the Spice Road, and it all came here, and you see all of that in the clothing, I think. And also, because it was a very sophisticated city, I think probably there were a lot of people who were quite decadent, and I suppose there's a very decadent strand, I think, in Antwerp fashion as well, which is something I respond to. The sense of a sort of little frisson, not taboo necessarily, but just a very unique, a very idiosyncratic approach to the experiences that life can throw your way, I think. And also the sense of people taking their time is very strong here. I don't think I ever come away from speaking to designers here or seeing their shows and feel that they're absolutely paralyzed with a sense of urgency that kind of, you know, that stops them thinking things through and fully realizing what it is they want to do. I mean, amazingly accomplished technically as well.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That was supposed to be a little short answer.
But our academy here, I think there are a lot of students here in the room. Is there some kind of advice you could give them? Because you are in this fashion world so long, seen so many things.
It's so hard. Because it is so hard. It just is really, really hard. And I would say, be brave. You know, don't be scared just to. If there's somebody you want to meet, if there's somebody you want to talk to, track them down. Be relentless. Stalk them. Hound them. And there's a good chance if you're from Antwerp, you'll have something really good to show them. So I just think you need to be really, really brave, and you need to be really, really, and also I think it's good not to be thinking about the big house on the hill, you know, not to be thinking about selling like $50 million or whatever. I think that London's a great model for people who do what they do because they love what they do, not because they want to be millionaires. And I think in Antwerp you can do that. You know, there's something about the struggle of life in New York where you really need to be doing well. And I think here doing well means something else.
Yeah.
I don't know, am I talking through a hole in my head? Are you going to say that?
No, I think
it's
that's
complete nonsense, but
and
I just feel that. I feel it comes
yeah.
through in the work. I feel that there's a consideration and
Yeah.
there's a reflection in the work.
I think that's really a nice note to end on. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Blanks.
Thank you very much.